And one day we were having a conversation, I'll never forget it. He goes, the worst decision I ever made, the biggest mistake I ever made was helping you become the pastor of this church. You lead worship okay, you're okay with a few things. And this really rocked me to the core because it was hard to grab hold of that because here was a man who put me in that position and here was a man that I looked up to. And now he was basically saying that at that point, the last 18 years of my life was a mistake. Welcome back to the Audacious Faith Podcast, episode 118. And you know what? I'm not going to waste time. I'm just going to get right to it. In some of your cases out there, I just don't like you. And that's okay, right? Because if we're being honest, you probably don't like me too much either. In fact, it's amazing that you're even watching this right now. It's just you saw the title and it drew your attention. So let's have a conversation. I may not like you because I don't understand the way you think. I can't even understand how you think that way. And I'm sure that the same is true in reverse. But even though I may not like you all the time, I do love you. And the reason for that is because God loves you. And if that's how he feels about you, and that's how he feels about me, despite my imperfections and despite all the things that I've done and thought that are incorrect, then how can I not then turn around and not only love him back, but love you also? That's going to be the subject today. You know, we've been taught from an early age to love those who love us, love those who matter to us, and have a resentment and have even possibly a hate for our enemies, because we'll have enemies out there. We'll have people that just don't appreciate us, people that even say things about us falsely, do things that hurt us. And it's our natural response, that fight or flight type of response that we have, right? Our natural response is to rise up against those who have risen up against us and those who don't agree with us and those who stand for things that are totally opposed to where we want to go. But Jesus in the Bible, he clarified something in Matthew chapter 5. He said, you know what? You've been told. You've been told by others. You've been told even by men of old to love those who love you and to despise those who don't, to actually hate your enemies. But he said, I'm telling you that I want you to actually love your enemies. Do good to them. Pray for them. Be someone who cares for them. So why love your enemies? Well, here's the first reason why we're going to choose to love each other today and why we should. Reason number one, Jesus actually commands us to do that, as I just stated. Also, it shows that the grace of God that hopefully we're receiving in our life, we're then willing to share with others as well. So how do we do it? That's the question. I know that's what we're thinking to ourselves right now. Okay, how do I change from having a problem with everybody, which we're seeing in the country going on right now a lot, right? If you don't agree with me, I'm going to put you on blast. I'm going to blast you on social media. I'm going to block you. I'm going to delete you. I'm going to slander you. I'm going to, put things about you on TikTok or wherever else we're going to do it. How do we change that method and instead start loving our enemies? The first way to do it is to pray for them. Jesus tells us to do this. Pray for those who persecute you. That seems crazy. A lot of you are probably listening to that right now and saying, I'll pray for them, all right. I'll pray that you strike them with a lightning bolt. I'll pray that you take care of it. I'll pray for the verse, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. And that is true if that is necessary. But here's the thing. That's not our decision to make. The Bible tells us, Jesus says, pray for your enemies. And you know what? It's a lot easier for me to love you and a lot less easy for me to dislike you and to be having a problem with you when I'm praying for you. When I'm praying that great things will happen. I'm praying that happiness will come in your life. I'm praying that blessing will come. I'm praying that even if you're upset and you're angry right now and there are things that are driving the behavior that I'm perplexed at, that God will bless you in such a way that you'll find joy and you'll find happiness. It's so much harder for us to have a problem with each other when we are in each other's prayers and we're praying for the best. So that's the first thing I want to tell you today that I'm doing, and I'm hoping that you will do as well. Second thing, choose to respond to people that you have disagreements with kindness instead of retaliation. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the love chapter, it tells us that love is patient, meaning it suffers long, and love is kind. It's kind. So when somebody's coming at you, when someone's saying things that are nasty, when somebody's just being upset, you know how I've found a great way to not have a problem with these people and to have them even respond better to me? Kindness. Kindness. Let's not go to battle. Let's not be going to war. Let's treat others with kindness. Here's the third one. Get ready for this one. Forgive. Forgive others even when it's hard. See, there's people you really don't like, you might even hate in your life, and you have justifiable reasons in your head. Reasons that many would agree with. Reasons that most of us humanly would agree with. They've hurt you. They've done terrible things. Maybe some of these things that are beyond imagination that we wouldn't even want to discuss on a podcast like this. So yes, it's very hard when we've been hurt deeply, when we've been offended, when we've been slandered, when we've been wronged, when we've been possibly physically abused, verbally abused, some horrible things that some of you listening to this podcast right now have gone through. But here's the problem. As hard as it may be to forgive, we've got to understand that as long as we don't, their hurt continues to tear us up. Their hurt continues to dominate and control our lives even when they're not present. We allow them to do it to us over and over and over again as we continue to relive it and focus on it and have it fill us with the rage and the hate and the hurt and the doubt and everything that possibly you're feeling right now. We look at Scripture in Matthew 18, and we see that Jesus shows us the example of the fact that after all that he has forgiven each one of us and how we have offended God in our sins, anything else, no matter how horrible, that anyone else has done in comparison is not a greater burden of forgiveness and in any way of what he's forgiven us. And he wants us then, even though it's been horrible, to release it to him, to pray for those individuals, and to find a way in his strength to forgive. And when we do that, it will cause us to not be continually having that control our lives every day. So let me say this, to not hate our enemies, to not be disliking people constantly, and to choose to love people, it's a choice. It's a decision that each one of us needs to make. And I can't help but think back to one instance in my life that involved a man who I had looked up to. He was a mentor to me. He was someone that encouraged me. He had actually played a part in me taking on the role as senior pastor at the church that I'm at First Baptist Church of El Monte way back in 1991. He helped bring me to this church. And in 1995, he was one of the instrumental voices that spoke up saying that even though I was young, people should give me a chance and allow me to take on that pastoral position. And so we would meet many times. We would have breakfasts together. I'd go to him for advice. I considered him like a fatherly mentor figure. And then one day he was having a difficulty in his life. He was older. His wife that he had been married to for many years, she was sick. She was struggling health-wise. And he had a past himself where as a child, he didn't experience love. His parents were very difficult, very hard to get close to, and they were very abusive in many of the things that they said. And so he struggled with this for all his life. And as he went through this difficult time, something that I did, or maybe I guess you could say something that I didn't do, there was a way I didn't come through, and it bothered him. And he turned on me. And one day we were having a conversation, I'll never forget it. And he said, "You know what?" He goes, "The worst decision I ever made, the biggest mistake I ever made was helping you become the pastor of this church." And he said, "You're not a pastor. You lead worship okay. You're okay with a few things, but you're not a pastor." And this really rocked me to the core because it was hard to to grab hold of that, because here was a man who put me in that position, and here was a man that I looked up to, and now he was basically saying that at that point, the last 18 years of my life was a mistake. And I looked at him that night. It was kind of in a darkened room. There wasn't very much light. We were right in the main sanctuary, just feet away from where I would be tasked to speak to people every single week. And I remember looking at him and not knowing what to. I looked at him and said, honestly, I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry you feel that way. I don't know what to say. And he proceeded to tell me that he would be leaving the church. He and his wife would be leaving the church, and they would go somewhere else because they couldn't stay there anymore. And I was devastated, quite honestly. It rang in my head. I didn't know what to say. I hardly shared it with anyone because it was just too hard to share. And as I processed this all through, there was a dilemma that was coming in my head. And maybe you've experienced this dilemma in your life as well. How would I now view and how would I respond to this man who had meant so much to me in my life? My immediate human response was to be angry. Not just hurt, but angry. My immediate human response was to want to lash out back, was to want to make a decision that, you know what? I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. My immediate decision would be to slander him. My immediate response would be to want to have now a hatred for him. But I battled, and I had made mistakes like that in the past. And I could feel the Spirit of God working on me saying, do not hate him. Refuse to hate him. It doesn't matter how he feels. He's hurt right now. You need to pray for him. He's struggling right now. You need to pray for him. He's saying things that he's not in his right mind right now. You need to pray for him. You need to refuse to feel anything towards him but love. And I battled that because it was very hard, and what he said was very hurtful. And I also had to think about the things he said and ask myself, was there any truth to what he was telling me? And I did find that some of the things that he was criticizing me about, there was actually some validity to it. There was some truth to it. There were things I needed to work on. That God had allowed this conversation in my life, even though he didn't have the right intentions, to wake me up to a few things that I needed to change. And so there was this process. It wasn't too long after, a few months later, I came across this man again. I was out at Rose Hill Cemetery, and if you're familiar with Southern California, it's one of the biggest cemeteries actually in the world. It's huge, absolutely huge. And we were out doing a graveside, and I was out there, and he was there. It was very low attendance. It was an older person that didn't have many friends. Most of their friends had already passed away, and they didn't have much family. And he was one of about 10 people that were there, so it was very hard to avoid him. I was tasked to do the service, and as the time came to leave, he was about to leave, and God just grabbed a hold of my heart and said, you know what, this may be one of the few opportunities that you have. You need to go to him right now. And I went to him at that moment, and I literally almost lost it. I almost began to cry, and I said, I know you're upset with me. I get that I've hurt you, but I don't want us to have this problem between each other. I just don't want to do, and I wanted you to know that I love you and I refuse to have a problem with you, no matter how you feel about me. And he responded in a very interesting way. It kind of melted his heart just a little bit at that point. And he said, you know what, I'll always look at you like a son. And he says, you know that I feel that way, even though we've had our disagreements and we don't completely agree. And so we left on good terms that day. I was so thankful that I listened to the voice of God at that moment and took the opportunity to humble myself, despite what I had felt when he had told me those things, and to try to make right with him. Fast forward. Several years later, his wife had been long passed away. This is probably 8-9 years later. He was struggling with his health. He was on what they called hospice care, but very light hospice care. He was alone. He was in an apartment. He was 45 minutes away from me. And I had the opportunity to go and to visit with him several times during the year that he was in that state. And we had some great conversations. And I'll never forget, just a few weeks before he died, he said to me, he looked at me and he said, I need to tell you something. He goes, the things that I said about you, he goes, I was wrong. I was incorrect. You are a pastor. You've changed so much. You've grown so much. And when the time comes to do thy funeral, I want to make sure that you're the one who does it. And I had the opportunity to do that. It was just a few weeks later, actually, after he said that, I called him. For some reason, I was prompted one night to call him right before I was going into a meeting. And I was trying to arrange to see him 2 days later, and he said, you know what? I'm not feeling well, and I don't think that I'm going to be able to do that this Friday. I didn't understand exactly what he's telling me. But I had to go to a meeting, but right before we got off the phone, he asked me, he said, but how are you doing? I didn't understand at that point how big a question that was, because what I didn't know was that 20 minutes later, after we got off the phone, he would be ushered into the presence of Jesus. That's how sick he was at that particular moment. And the fact that he still cared enough, and there was a love enough at that point to still ask me, feeling the way he did, how are you doing, is something that I would never forget. Now, why do I tell you this? I tell you this because there's people in your life right now that you possibly just really don't like. In fact, you've maybe even fallen into the trap of hating them. You need to stop. You need to make it right. I would have been robbed of the blessing of restoring the relationship with that man who meant something to me. Even if he didn't, I would have been robbed of that victory, that change, those moments, if I had allowed hate and despisement to take over. I'm thankful to God that he didn't let me do that, and he pushed me to make a different decision. And I want to challenge you today, because there's too much division going on today. There's too many people that are not only saying, I don't like you, but I despise you. It's not serving you. It's not making your life better, and it's definitely not making the life better of those around you. Let's change it around. You can decide. You can make the decision to change it around on the way that you treat others. That's my take to you today. That's my wish for you today. There was other stuff I was going to share, but I think I shared enough. I hope that you will have this same type of victory, and please share it with me when you do. If you go to somebody now in the next few days and you transform a relationship that maybe has been ugly up to this point, will you please reach out to us and let us know? You can contact me at jgothirsenior@gmail.com, or contact me there on Facebook or Instagram, or here on Instagram of the Audacious Faith Podcast. Please subscribe. And also, if you know somebody that's struggling with something like this in their life, will you please pass on this episode so that they can hear it as well? May God bless you in tremendous ways, more than you could even ask or think. And I look forward to all the future times that we will be together as well. This has been the Audacious Faith Podcast. Until next time, take care.